there everybody. I thought I would do a video this afternoon showing you how to pour an album. The album will later be turned into a clock. I use just an old album that I purchased at a thrift store. You can pick them up pretty darn cheap. This one actually was poured on. It was a tree ring pour that I did not like once it was finished, so I decided I would lightly sand that. It got wiped down with an alcohol wipe. And then all I do to prep these is just to put a little bit of tape across the hole on the back of it so that the paint doesn't seep through. Otherwise, I don't tape the backs of it. Once I get it resined, I find that if I use a putty knife, I can usually just scrape off the little resin blobs on the back and it cleans up really easily. So I normally don't do a whole lot to prep these. I just kind of clean them and start pouring from there. The colors I'm using today are phthalo blue, light blue violet, Prussian blue. I'm also using a metallic blue, sky blue light, cerulean blue, Payne's gray, and then this is my special concoction of Rustoleum glitter paint and my pouring medium. And I've already started to kind of pour. I'm also using white as well. I've started to pour my paints just so that you don't have to watch me do both cups for during the video. But I like to layer my paints in, and I kind of try to do darker, lighter, darker, and kind of just layer from there. This is the light blue violet. It's a really pretty color. I do not use silicone, or excuse me, yes, I do not use silicone in my paints. I do, however, when I'm doing a dirty cup pour or dirty cup flip, I do, however, spray just very lightly with the silicone, the WD-40 silicone, just so that it releases my paint and I don't get it all stuck in the bottom. This is the Prussian blue. I find that the Prussian blue and the Payne's gray give me really nice effects. This is the sky blue light, and I just continue layering up. These are, I believe, 5-ounce cups. This is the cerulean blue, Payne's gray, which is another good one to give some really cool effects. And then I use the Artist Loft Flow acrylic with my pouring medium. And then I'm just going to go back in and add probably one more layer. I believe this is a 5-ounce cup. So I usually do 2 cups, so I'll flip one in the center and then kind of pour the other one on the outside, and hopefully that's enough paint to cover my surface. If not, then I'll just pour a little bit more into a cup and wing it from there. Doesn't have to be totally serious, and it's okay if you make a mistake. It's always easy to fix it, and you can always go back and pour over it again if you don't like how it turns out. So I'm just going to take my glitter paint and kind of blop it down through the center so it kind of goes out through all my paints so that I get a nice cool sparkly effect. And then I'm just going to take my first cup, flip it over, and kind of let it sit a little bit. You can see I have some really cool cell action going on. I have a pouring medium that I believe Julie Cutts had a video that she had a pouring medium, and I actually messed up on my proportions, but it worked for me, so I kept using it. I used 4 cups of Floetrol that has been strained, a cup of glue all, Elmer's glue all, and then a 1/2 cup of Liquitex pouring medium and a 1/4 cup of water, and I mixed that all into a jug and then just mix my paints. You can see that I use these little condiment bottles to have my paint pre-mixed, which works out really well for me. It makes pouring really easy for me, and I haven't had any issues with it being mixed up and just sitting there. Even if it's a couple of weeks between pouring, I don't have any issues. So I'm gonna go ahead and pull this cup off just so that I can kind of let that spread. And then I don't like to waste my paint, so I'll end up pouring this around the edges and set this one to the side and kind of let that flow out just a little bit, and then I'm going to pour this other one around the edge. So I'm just going to go ahead and pour around the outside of this now and get the rest of my paint on here, and then I'll start tilting it. I probably have a lot more than what I need, but I find that I would much rather have extra paint and dump it off than to not have enough and not get a really cool effect from it. So this is kind of going to have a ribbon around the outside of it, but that's okay. I'm just going to pour through what I've already put down, kind of let that settle out a little bit. You can see that by using that WD-40, I don't let it pool on the bottom of it, but it really does help in getting the paint out of the cups, which is really nice. So you can see I've got some really cool cell action going. I don't know if you can see the sparkle from the metallic paint, but I truly do love this paint. It's just Rustoleum, and I add my pouring medium to it, and just gives me some really cool glitter and sparkle effect to things. So I'm just going to go ahead and start kind of tilting this because my edges are almost covered anyway. So I'm just going to go ahead and start tilting it. I have a ton of paint on here, way too much. So just going to kind of run this around and dump off some of this paint and kind of pull it back to where I want it. Has some really neat effects going on. This little guy will probably dry for about 2 weeks, and then I will come back and add numbers and put a final coat of resin on it and add the clock movement and the hands to it, and she'll be ready to go to her new owner. So the next step in making the clock is to apply the numbers. And this clock was poured actually several weeks ago, so I would probably wait at least a week to 10 days before you do this next portion. And as I had said before, this is a custom order, and she wanted numbers all the way around the clock. So I have already put most of the numbers on, so you guys didn't have to watch me do that. But I wanted to show you this little template. This is from the clock part seller that I use off of Etsy. And she actually has this template on her website that you can print off, and you just cut it out and place it down. I've got like a little notch here in the center of the album where the paint was poured. And so I just kind of placed that in the middle where I felt like it was centered on the clock. And then that laid out exactly where my numbers needed to be. So I'm using, this is a Tombow multi-adhesive, hopefully you can see that, multi-adhesive liquid glue. And this is what I use to put on my numbers. And I just kind of make sure that I've got the back of the number covered. And you want to be careful not to let it ooze out if you have a mirror finish like I'm using now, because if you do, it tends to leave marks on the numbers, and that's not very appealing. So I'm just going to go ahead and place my number 5 down here. And then I just make sure that my number is adhered well. And then I kind of look to make sure that everything looks good. And I do that before I kind of lightly stick it down, and then I just make sure that my numbers look okay, and then I'll press them down completely because I kind of lift up the album and look at it straight on to make sure that yes, that looks good. And so this is all done, and I'm going to go ahead and take my little template off and save that for the next time. And then the next step is to put the resin on. So I'm going to mix up my resin, and I'll be back to show you that step. So hold tight. Okay, so I have my resin all mixed up, and today I'm using the Pro Marine resin. This is my first time using it. I had ordered it for a big project that I have that hopefully you'll be seeing very near in the future. All right, my numbers are all on. I've cleaned my surface with Windex just to make sure that I have any silicone off of the surface. And then I do have this little resin spreading tool that I bought at Hobby Lobby. So I've not used one of these before, so I'm really hoping that this helps to kind of spread the resin out evenly, and hopefully I won't have as much waste because it seems like I have a lot that drips off the sides. So I've got my resin all mixed up here. I have a lot more than what I need for this project just because I'm planning on resining several pieces after I get done showing you guys how to do the clock. So just pouring a puddle in the middle, and then I'm going to use this little tool and spread that out, and we'll see how it works. Actually, I think this tool is going to be pretty nifty. It already seems like it's helping to conserve a little bit maybe. So on the numbers, I will tell you that when you glue them down like I showed you how to do, the one issue, if you will, that I have had with bubbles is that I will get bubbles around the numbers themselves. And I think part of that is just because I've used that glue, and I think there are definitely air bubbles, you know, once the resin seeps underneath the numbers. But you just need to kind of be diligent in watching for bubbles and just using your torch to lightly torch those and get rid of them while the resin is setting up. So I usually pour my resin on and then check it probably about a half an hour after I get done with the process. And then I will check it one final time within an hour or so just to make sure that I don't have bubbles, because that's not very pretty, especially when I feel like it's really noticeable when it's around the numbers. But I have a sticker machine in storage, and I'm kind of anxious to get things out of storage once the studio is done, and I think that might kind of be a nifty way to do the numbers and might keep it from getting bubbles around them. Okay, so just spreading all this out. So that's looking pretty good. I'm just going to put a little bit of extra on here with the stick and make sure that my edges are nicely done. Okay, so that's looking pretty good. Now I just want to torch this, but you want to use caution when you're torching because this is a vinyl album, and depending on how old the album is, depends on, I found that the older albums sometimes are a bit thicker. This one is not a thick album, so you want to be really careful and don't hold your torch in one spot too long because it will soften the vinyl and it will start to bend. So use caution when you're using your torch. So I'm just kind of lightly going over quickly in areas. And there's that torch spitting out more than I want it to. And I kind of hold it up away from it just in case it does flare up. But like I said, I really want to watch to make sure that around the numbers, I've got all the air bubbles popped. So I'm just going to go ahead and let this sit for about a half an hour, and I will retorch it to make sure that I don't have any more bubbles around the numbers. This will sit for a couple of days, and then I will come back and show you how I drill the center of it and put the clock assembly on it. So stay tuned. All right, we are ready to put the clock face on our clock now. I did resin this a couple of days ago, and I'm trying to be careful because it is easy to scratch the resin if you don't wait for it to reach its full hardness. So I'm trying to be really careful not to mess with it too much. But it turned out really pretty. I'm hoping that you'll be able to see the silver glitter that I put into the pour. And I also have some metallic paints in there, so it's quite beautiful when the light hits it. Hopefully I don't have the glare of the window on there. I've got my clock sitting on a wooden block, and that's just so that I can drill through the center of it. And then on the back side, I've gone ahead and put a piece of cork. And the reason I put the cork is by the time I get the clock mechanism on here, it seems like since the clock mechanism sits in the center, it kind of wants to tilt out from the wall at the top. So by putting this piece of cork on the bottom, it'll keep it straight so that it sits straight up and down on the wall. And what I started with was a small pilot hole, just so that it's a little bit easier for me to start the bigger hole. I order my clock parts off of Etsy from a store called Dorcas Designs. I'm going to put a link in the description so that you can get to her store if you'd like to purchase clock parts from her. The size that I use for the 12-inch clocks is a number 3, and those hands are 5 inches long. And then it's a 1/4 inch thread with hanger. So make sure that you buy the kit that has the hanger. This is the hanger. And let me show you one that I've already finished. This one is a little bit smaller clock. I believe this is a 78, and I love pouring on the 78s. This is the clock mechanism, and then the hanger goes on top of the clock mechanism in between the album and the part. So make sure that you do order the one that has the hanger on it. And this particular set is a number 6. And because these hands are only 4.5 inches long, because they don't have to be quite as long with the smaller album. I'm using a 5/16 inch drill bit, and I find that if I do the little pilot hole, it kind of has a little notch for the center of the bit to sit in, so that hopefully that'll make it a little bit easier for me to get it centered. So I'm going to go ahead and drill this now, and I'm just going to put my little notch down in the center, and then just slowly go down through the middle of the album. And I just kind of go nice and slow so that I don't crack my resin or do something crazy with it. And then there's our hole. So I'm just going to clean the resin off a little bit around the area where I drilled. All right, so now we want to do the clock mechanism with the clock. And this is our little hanger. And this is going to go right over this post in the center. And I don't know if you guys can see this, but there's actually like a little raised plastic portion here. And this ring on the hanger sits right over the top of that so that it stays nice and flat to the clock mechanism itself. And then I'm just going to feed that through the back of my clock. And hopefully that little guy stays where it needs to. And then I'm just going to kind of push this up through. And that's looking good. And I want to make sure that my hanger is straight up. Okay. I have a feeling I don't have this drilled quite as well as I should have. All right, and then the next thing, we're going to put a washer on here. And then the nut goes on top of that. And then I have a little pair of needle nose pliers, and I'm just going to hang on to that little nut and kind of push down as I turn it around so that it catches onto the threads of the hanger. And my experience is that there's not a lot that's sticking out, and I don't know if that's because my hole is not like super big, but there's not a ton that sticks out because of, and I imagine it probably has a lot to do with how thick your resin is too. So you just want to make sure that you've got that on there tight. And then this is the back of it. And now we're ready to put the hands on. So let me move this over to the side so you guys can see. Okay, so the hands go on the smallest to the biggest. So the hour hand goes on first, and you can, it just pushes on. So you just want to make sure that you kind of push gently and push it down all the way. If I were to ship this clock, I would not put the hands on before I ship it, just because the hands are really thin and I wouldn't want those to get bent while they were being shipped. So I'm just going to push that down all the way, and then my minute hand goes on next, and the hour hand goes on the bigger shaft down below, and then the minute hand goes on the smaller shaft above. So I just kind of want to, you can tell when you have it pushed all the way down, you can feel it stop. And then I have a second hand, and it has like a little stem here that goes right in the center. And so then that just gets pushed on, and you have a clock all assembled. And then you just add the battery on the back of it. So the other thing I would say is that once you do get your battery in, just make sure that all of your hands clear, because it's very easy to get these bent down just a little bit, and then they just get hung up on each other. So you may have to adjust these just a tiny bit. Otherwise, that is how easy it is to assemble a clock. So if you have any questions, please let me know. I hope that you will try to make a clock, because I think they're really a ton of fun and they are really a unique art piece. Thanks so much. Have a great day. Bye-bye.